Prime Minister Justin Trudeau called a rare meeting today with opposition leaders. He filled them in on what happened during his Friday dinner with President-elect Donald Trump. But while Trudeau presses for unity in the face of tariffs, there were still clear partisan divisions.
Right now, we're going into this problem in a state of weakness. Trump's tariffs would do damage, but Trudeau's taxes are already doing that damage.
We're trying to pull together as Team Canada, but I guess Mr. Poilievre can't help himself from trying to say in a private meeting the things that he objects to about government policy. So that really wasn't the room to be starting to argue about carbon taxes.
I don't want to fight too much publicly. Americans are looking at us now.
What Trump is threatening is very serious. We need to take it seriously. I wanted to make it very clear we can't take this approach that'll be okay. We've been here before. No, none of that is the right approach.
Catherine Cullen is the host of the CBC podcast, The House, and she joins me now. Okay, Catherine, you just saw the clips there. To what extent did they seem to come out of this meeting on something looking like the same page?
Yeah, I mean, I would say there was a moment there, David.
A brief moment.
A brief moment where it seemed like they were on the same page. I think, before we get into that, too, we just have to acknowledge, certainly on this show, I mean, you guys know, right? Night after night, there are extraordinary things happening. This is an extraordinary meeting. Imagine one thing Donald Trump has accomplished before even getting back into office is that he got all these folks around the same table. And I think it is important to point out that that is not something we see very often, particularly given the animus between Pierre Poilievre and the Prime Minister, to have everybody sitting around the same table talking about these issues. Extraordinary. And when the doors opened and the leaders started filing out, we did get a sense that maybe there was a bit of a, I don't know, is rapprochement too strong a word, David? Let's find out. Let's listen to a little bit of what Pierre Poilievre said immediately upon leaving this meeting.
These kinds of actions, were they ever to go ahead, would be damaging to the United States, just as they would be to Canada. I told the Prime Minister that, of course, at every opportunity I will make those arguments and make Canada's case on behalf of all Canadians to put Canada first, which is what we all need to do.
So, a sense there, David, that everyone is rowing in the same direction. And Mr. Poilievre made similar comments in French, but it only took another question from reporters before he started talking about the Prime Minister's plans on taxes and why the things he's doing for the country are not the right things. And then, I mean, a bit of a spoiler alert in the opening of the show there. By the time we had moved around a question period, it's not like things are kumbaya, let's say, right now. But a desire, I think, on at least to some extent, to pull together. Interesting, though, also to hear about some of the perspectives of the other leaders about this meeting, and particularly about how Mr. Poilievre behaved or positioned himself in the meeting. Let's listen to Jagmeet Singh.
I could say that on my part, I wanted to make it very clear that my focus is on protecting Canadian jobs. I can't say that for the Conservatives. Pierre Poilievre did not give that impression that he had this desire to protect Canadian jobs. For him, he was still trying to score political points, even when there's no cameras. So I don't understand his approach, his lack of commitment to protecting Canadians or their jobs. That to me was disappointing, even though there's no cameras there. I don't know who he was posturing for.
So is Mr. Poilievre being too partisan? Is Mr. Singh being too partisan there, David? I think people are going to have to sort that out for themselves. Interesting, though, I think the sense that we did get, the place where there was some unanimity was people will be reaching out to their contacts in the United States to make the case as forcefully as they can that these tariffs are not only going to hurt Canada, they're going to hurt the United States. In fact, Pierre Poilievre said that he thinks it's an easy argument to make, sort of suggesting that the Prime Minister, the task that is fundamentally in front of the Prime Minister is an easy one.
So just on that, do we know if the Conservatives are going to do that? Because Jamil Jivani and J.D. Vance, the VP-elect, are really good friends. I have asked the opposition leader's office if Mr. Jivani will be doing this or he'll be asked to do this. I do not have an answer. I don't know if you have an answer. It is a great unknown because that is a relationship you would want to weaponize in a moment like this, it seems.
Well, and I think it's a bit of a tricky question to the extent to which you lean on a personal friendship. I have asked as well, David. I do not have those answers. And we know Mr. Jivani has been asked numerous times in front of the cameras. It's not something he wants to engage on, although our friends over at Politico did report that the two of them had lunch recently.
In the cafeteria on Capitol Hill, I believe it was.
Yes, so questions abound.
Yes, okay, all right. So look, that's the partisan politics of it, right? What do we know about the actual plan to respond to the Trump's tariffs, right? Because it's stop negotiating against ourselves in public, reach out to your people, let's all get on the same page. But they've got to convince the president-elect not to do this.
Yes, and obviously a lot of this is still focused on the border. I mean, there's a message about the tariffs, but I think everyone agrees that the message needs to be sent to Donald Trump that Canada is taking action on the border. He has, of course, raised both the question of drugs and the question of people crossing the border who shouldn't be. There was a committee meeting today, and Dominic LeBlanc was there talking about some of the things that he talked about on this program, right? Helicopters, drones, more personnel. Now, Raquel Dancho, the public safety critic for the Conservatives, was really pressing him, saying, you know, we are so close to the inauguration. Why aren't we getting specifics on a plan? How can you prove to us that there's a plan, that there are going to be more boots on the ground when it comes to the CBSA, the RCMP? Where is the plan, Minister? Dominic LeBlanc really pushed back. He said, listen, just because I'm not spelling out all the specifics today in this committee meeting, let me assure you we are seized with this matter. Chrystia Freeland and I are talking about the money behind it. The specifics are coming. I think it's also important to note, David, at that same committee appearance, the same session of the committee, the RCMP commissioner was there and said, listen, I don't want to get ahead of ourselves in terms of what's happening specifically, but there is flexibility. We are really talking about this threat in two terms, right? People going to the United States, but also the prospect of a surge coming our way. There's a lot of flexibility. You know, next time it may not be Roxham Road. We can deploy people where we need to, and that they have even thought about the possibility of trainees, of cadets being deployed to the border if things get that extreme. So obviously the conversation's underway. Going to be interesting to see how the money part of this conversation comes through. The Conservatives have said they'd back a plan on the border, stop some of the stuff that's going on in the House of Commons, at least temporarily. So very interesting to see what it's going to look like specifically and how the progress of that would go through the House of Commons.
Yeah, and there's just a personnel question, right? Like, where do you get the officers? Do you pull them away from other things to do this, right? And that's going to be the challenge for the RCMP. All right, Catherine, thank you so much. This is CBC's Catherine Cullen. So do partisan divides invade the closed-door meeting? Elizabeth May was there. She is the leader of the Green Party, and she joins me now from the foyer of the House. Ms. May, it's good to see you again. Thanks for being here.
Thanks, David.
What was your assessment of the meeting, and what did the Prime Minister ask of all the party leaders?
I have to say that overall, I think the meeting was cordial. Overall, it was welcome. We did get a briefing from the Prime Minister and Chrystia Freeland as Minister of Finance and Dominic LeBlanc. And I thought the questions and the discussion between party leaders afterwards was, for the most part, Team Canada at work. I mean, that's what we want to be when we're faced with President-elect Donald Trump saying he's going to slap 25% tariffs on us. We've got till January 20th, till his inauguration, and the effort to say, look, let's all work together and not give him any ammunition. Let's work together and try to blunt this threat. So, you know, I thought Pierre Poilievre's first question right off the top was to Justin Trudeau, do you really think he's motivated by the tariffs or related to our border and fentanyl? And Justin Trudeau was very honest. He said, look, I think he's really worried about American lives, and he's worried about fentanyl coming across our border. But of course, it's like less than half of 1% of fentanyl getting to the U.S. comes from Canada. Like Canada's fentanyl is not coming. We do have a lot of cocaine and guns coming across the border into Canada from the U.S., so our border's been a concern for me as well for some time, but in the other direction from Donald Trump's concern.
So that was the first question from Mr. Poilievre about whether this is really what was motivating Trump. And the Prime Minister, and that aligns with everything they have said coming out of the meeting from Mar-a-Lago, that they do believe this is what is motivating them. But how did the Prime Minister characterize the seriousness of the Trump administration incoming of imposing these tariffs?
Well, I don't think there's any question that the Prime Minister said it publicly. He thinks he's serious. One of the things that really hit home with me was the way in which we as opposition party leaders talk about our country can give rise to or help misinformation and disinformation about Canada take root in the U.S. So Justin Trudeau reminded us all that there are still people in the United States who think the 9/11 terrorists came across the border from Canada into the U.S. We all know that's bogus, but those kinds of stories, once they take root, can undermine our credibility when, as a nation, we push back and say, look, we've got more monitoring at our border, we'll work with you, we can do collaborative things to make sure the borders are more secure, but the Canada-U.S. border is not your problem, Donald Trump. You've got other problems, and if you slap 25% tariffs on everything from Canada and the U.S., you're going to be, fighting your economy to punish us wrongfully. So I think it was a good conversation. I think Jagmeet Singh was very productive in his commentary back. Look, we got to figure out how to pull together. Monsieur Blanchet aussi. I mean, we We were talking as Canadians about what we individually could do. Are there opportunities we could pursue as politicians who, through various networks, have our own contacts in the United States who could influence Donald Trump? Just as in the past, Justin Trudeau asked former Prime Minister Brian Mulroney to help influence Canada's case with Donald Trump, we all have connections with people who could try to influence Donald Trump.
I wonder, you said overall it was a good meeting. Overall is doing a lot of lifting, doing a lot of work in that answer. So it wasn't entirely everybody on board. Like, I know you had criticism that Mr. Poilievre wanted to talk about the carbon tax, but this is a signature demand of his. And I guess his argument is that the tariffs will damage the economy, so we need to help the economy in every way we can on this side of the border to to blunt the impact of that. But was that it? Or do you think Mr. Poilievre will get on board here? Because you were all asked not to say things like the border is broken, and that's immediately what he said. So where do you think Team Canada is at this moment?
Well, I mean, that is exactly the point. We were no sooner out the door from being in the cabinet room with the Prime Minister than Pierre Poilievre was in front of the microphones repeating the same kind of lines that goodness knows we don't want Fox News broadcasting. Even the leader of the official opposition says we have a broken border. We don't have a broken border. We need more border security guards. There's no question about that. CBSA personnel should be augmented. But we have been effective. The RCMP and CBSA together have busted a bunch of drug rings that were, and so it's an ongoing effort, and I think we should be united behind that effort to make sure CBSA has the people they need, because I mean there were huge cuts to CBSA under the Harper administration. We've got to rebuild from that, and my view has been from forever that we ought to be paying a lot more attention that the illegal handguns in Canada come across the border from the US. We ought to be making sure drugs and guns don't come into Canada from the US. That effort also fortifies making sure that illegal drugs and migrants don't go illegally from Canada into the US. It's a very minor problem overall in the US issue around insecurity and Trump's particular personal preoccupations to keep Americans safe. But I think the message, we can work with you to make sure we keep both populations, Canadians and Americans, safe. That's something that we share on a shared continent. We may sometimes be uneasy neighbors, but I think we're always friends.
Yeah, look, a border this long in countries this rich and this populated, you're going to have some issues. But you know, in the global scheme of things, and even on the continental scheme of things, it is not a very problematic border. But you know, Wab Kinew kind of bottom-lined it after the Premier's meeting, saying you're not going to argue your way out of this. You need to do things to settle it. So, in terms of what the Prime Minister suggested to you and the other leaders, do you have a clear sense that there is a robust enough plan to respond to what Donald Trump wants? And do you think it'll need legislation and approval by the House of Commons to get it done?
Well, there's some things that are going to need legislation around changing some of the spending around and maybe even changing some of the mandate around CBSA. But there's a lot that can be done. I'm not going to say based on one briefing that I'm satisfied that we have a completely robust plan. But I do think the plan of presenting ourselves as a country that is united, I think the work the Prime Minister said in the meeting, he'll be continuing to have regular meetings with premiers. I hope he has regular meetings with opposition leaders. I hope we can fortify ourselves and use opportunities when we're in the U.S. meeting with congressmen and senators from various political places on the political spectrum to communicate the message that Canada hears you loud and clear. Our border isn't your problem, but if you slap 25% tariffs on Canadian goods, you're just going to be blowing the nose off the U.S. economy to spite your own face.
Okay, but you say some things are going to need legislation. We just spoke with Karina Gould before you, and you know, she's got a mess on her hands because of what's happening in the House of Commons, right? So I know the Conservatives have said that in general terms they would help a border package get through. How confident are you that if the Trudeau government comes back with something between now and the Christmas break or early in the new year in a special session of Parliament before January 20th, that it can get through the House of Commons and the Senate and get the approval that it needs?
Well, we had a real life example recently. I mean, the GST tax break, which the Conservatives voted against, we were able to get a pause in the privilege debate process to get that through quite expeditiously. Not my favorite piece of legislation, although I voted for it. I think when something is important as protecting Canada from 25% tariffs, being able to say to Donald Trump, we don't just talk about it, look what got done even before you got inaugurated. We're serious about this. And by the way, the idea that we have to trade off climate for the economy, you'll know what I'm going to say, David, but I mean, the U.S. had 24 climate events this year, each of which cost them $1 billion in damages. These are not separate issues. So maybe we can even reach Donald Trump on that. I never give up on, what Winston Churchill said, eventually the Americans will do the right thing after they've exhausted every other possibility.
Right. All right. Elizabeth May, thanks for joining us. That's Green Party leader Elizabeth May.
Thank you.
This afternoon in Ottawa, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau held a rare meeting with all opposition leaders to brief them on his dinner with President-elect Donald Trump. It was a meeting that was supposed to unify them around a Team Canada approach to Trump's tariff threat, but instead seemed to be sidelined, at least a little, by some partisan politics.
We demand that the Prime Minister fix the disorder that he's caused at the border, fix the immigration's problems that he has caused, but he also has to reverse the job-crushing tax increases that he's imposing right now.
Pierre Poilievre did not give that impression that he had this desire to protect Canadian jobs. For him, he was still trying to score political points, even when there's no cameras. So I don't understand his approach.
We're trying to pull together as Team Canada, but I guess Mr. Poilievre can't help himself from trying to say in a private meeting the things that he objects to about government policy. So that really wasn't the room to be starting to argue about carbon taxes.
We also learned today that during that dinner at Mar-a-Lago, Trump made a comment about the potential economic effects of his threatened tariffs, saying if Canada can't handle the price of them, it should become the 51st American state. Today, Public Safety Minister Dominic LeBlanc, who was at that dinner, said that comment was clearly a joke.
In a 3-hour social evening at the president's residence in Florida on a long weekend of American Thanksgiving, the conversation was going to be lighthearted. The president was telling jokes. The president was teasing us. It was, of course, on that issue, in no way a serious comment. But the fact that there's a warm, cordial relationship between the two leaders and the president is able to joke like that, for us was a positive thing.
So while Canada reacted to that joke today, Trump posted this on social media. It's an AI-generated image of him with the Canadian flag and what looks like a Toblerone bar or the Matterhorn in Switzerland in the background, and he's captioned it, "Oh, Canada." So on that note, let's bring in the power panel. Welcome back to Trumpland, folks. Emily Nicolas is a columnist for Le Devoir. Françoise Boivin is a former NDP MP. And here with me in the studio is Michelle Cadario, a former Liberal National Campaign Director, and Kate Harrison, a Conservative political analyst. You forget the Trump news cycle until you're back in the Trump news cycle. So let's back it up, Michelle, and start with the meeting.
Yes.
We haven't seen something like this really, I think, since COVID. What did you make of, everyone seemed to emerge aligned with the Conservative leader as a bit of an outlier today. That's the consensus of what they all said. Do you think the Team Canada approach is going to work in the House of Commons?
Well, Kate and I think are starting it with our red blazers here. In the studio.
You're in uniform, right?
But Canada has a uniform. I don't think that we can expect any better of Pierre Poilievre, quite frankly. I thought it was, for him, a little bit muted. And a little bit more pro-Team Canada than perhaps we've seen all along. I think that the point, though, is let's not negotiate against ourselves. Let's not start poking holes in places and trying to show up all the weaknesses. Now is the time to kind of coalesce. And I don't think that Canadians are going to be taking it very well. And I suspect that the Conservatives are doing a whole lot of polling that is telling them that very thing, that the expectation on anybody who wants to be Prime Minister of Canada, surely, but certainly who is a representative of Canadians, should be kind of, joining forces and putting the country first, putting Canadian jobs first. And so I think that as that realization kind of sits upon him, then perhaps we can expect a little bit better behavior.
So Kate, on that, like all the national leaders get together in the cabinet room, that's where they met apparently, and they were all asked to not say things like the border is broken. And in about 45 seconds, Pierre Poilievre says the border is broken, and then he leads off question period about the broken border.
Right.
This is exactly the sort of thing they're all being asked not to do because it helps the U.S. news cycle and helps the president-elect's argument.
he was making comments about the border well before that meeting.
Sure.
He had also done an entire media availability on Sunday where he talked about what he would do to fix the border. So he's not just coming out and saying the border is a problem and it needs to be fixed. He's also outlining a path for how it could be fixed and actions that the government could take. So it's not just identification of a problem, there's also a solutions roadmap that he's identified. I also think that on the border, we shouldn't be looking to fix it because Donald Trump has asked us. We should be looking to fix it because Canadians demand it. We have a border crisis here, we have a border crisis, or we have a fentanyl crisis, in Canada, and we should be looking to remedy these things because Canadians want it, not just because Donald Trump has asked. So, I appreciate not wanting to have uncomfortable conversations play out like this, but the Liberals have had 9 years to try and fix some of these messes. It's a little bit rich for them to say, please follow our message track when they've had so much time to try and clean up some of these problems and they haven't taken the opportunity to do so.
Right, but François, there's like 40-something days until the 20th of January, which is the deadline for action from Canada to head off the tariffs. The premiers have kind of gotten on board with this. A lot of industry is asking for people to get on board with this and just sort of keep your powder dry on these issues until we've dealt with the president-elect's demands. What do you make of what we saw today?
Well, first of all, I thought it was a good move from Justin Trudeau to have all the leaders from the different parties to try to form that Team Canada. We heard a lot about the expression in the mouth of Elizabeth May during your interview. It's in a sense, I'm a bit conflicted because I was hoping to see Pierre Poilievre coming out like a future maybe prime minister, showing that yes, right now, Canada is voicing one voice, and we're all unified against one person, Donald Trump. At the same time, was I expecting him to push aside completely his rhetoric? I tend to agree with Kate. I would have felt a bit weird to hear suddenly Pierre Poilievre come out and say, hey, yay, it's fantastic. We're all unified. Everything is great. Love the plan. Move along, Justin, and we're backing. We have your back. I don't think we would have thought that he was very sincere. I thought he took a tone that was a bit more subdued, more quiet, the way he's been talking. He was not too overly aggressive. I thought also my ex-party was a bit partisan because for most of the time that Jagmeet Singh talked, it was to trash on Poilievre. You might say inside the room, there were people that were trying to make some cheap political point, but it felt like what we will hear during the campaign. Conservatives don't want to play with others and so on and so forth. So I don't exactly know what we should have heard other than appreciate that the Prime Minister invited us all and we move along and hope for the best for all Canadians. Well, that's the best I can hope for from all of these guys.
Emily, I don't think anyone expects partisanship to be completely set aside and disagreement to be completely set aside. But, Yves-François Blanchet is a sovereigntist, and he got on Team Canada today, right? He came out and said, I don't want to be fighting in public about this because the stakes are too high. I mean, what are your thoughts on what we saw in Ottawa?
First of all, on the border, I think the good task to be able to tell whether people are coming at this from a I agree with Trump, let's give Trump everything versus a protecting Canadian interests perspective is the issue of gun control. When people are mentioning the border without mentioning gun control, you know that they're just basically being fans of Donald Trump. It is a major issue for Canada, but it's a major issue for Mexico. It's a major issue from Haiti. We hear a lot about the crisis of Haiti. We rarely hear the fact that all the guns in Haiti are actually being smuggled from Miami. As long as there are going to be people in the U.S. able to walk into Walmart and buy a gun, we're going to have a security issue from the entire region of the Americas. And when people are responding to Donald Trump, who has concerns about borders, without mentioning gun control, you know that people are being afraid of him and playing right into his hands. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, when it comes to putting partisanship aside, we've seen everybody but the Conservatives being able to do that today, although I agree that the words coming from Pierre Poilievre were quieter than some of the things we've heard in the past. But the thing is, it's really going to be up to Canadians for this to judge, to be the judge of that. If the population doesn't like Pierre Poilievre behaving like this, they're going to be able to tell through polls, but through an election eventually. And it's going to show in terms of support if that's not the tone that they expect from somebody who wants to be prime minister. And so we can, as panelists, say all we want, but it's going to be up to the people listening to us and the people in general to be able to tell whether or not that is something that they think is prime ministerial right now.
But the public has also, I just have to say, the public has already weighed in to this degree through public opinion polling when asked who they think would be better to manage the relationship with the United States. Time and again, they are choosing Pierre Poilievre. And I don't think that it matters that some of that polling happened prior to the election. I think Canadians have a pretty good idea of who Donald Trump is and what he's all about. He's been the president before. We've also had Prime Minister Trudeau manage that relationship. So we have history to judge that.
But Pierre Poilievre is not going to get to manage that relationship in the time between now and the tariff deadline, right?
Exactly.
Like, that's the challenge here.
I would say that. I do think that.
Sorry, let Kate finish. I'll come to Emily and then go to Michelle. Sorry.
Okay.
Yeah.
Canadians have a firm view of what Donald Trump is about. I think they have a pretty clear view of what Pierre Poilievre would do and the issues he would prioritize. And they are saying, time and again, when asked, that they would prefer that approach to what the Prime Minister has put forward.
There's no question and for the next election, but in this narrow window of time.
And that was certainly prior to the tariffs and the tariff threat. That was long before that.
Yeah.
Well,
let's also face it,
what's happening right now is that people are seeing it in real time. People are seeing in real time Pierre Poilievre choosing to react the way he does. And I think people are going to make their mind about what they are seeing right now. It's different from seeing it, in theory than seeing it in practice. And none of us can tell how people are going to be reacting. But I think it's very different with the threat of tariff that is so crucial and weighs so heavily on the Canadian economy. People are seeing this not as something theoretical, not as something that happened in 2016 or 2020. It's happening now, and they're judging people's character. It's not even about policy, it's people's character.
They're judging people's plans.
They're judging right now.
Sorry, I fundamentally disagree with that.
The plans that Mr. Poilievre have are actually to fix what he actually pulled back on as part of his government with Stephen Harper. So, all of these things about reinvesting and all that, well, who cut all that? That was Stephen Harper and his government.
10 years ago.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. So is he proud of that? He's not quite standing up for the fact of why he actually kind of cut back on all of that.
If the Liberals want to fight the next election about cuts that were made 10 years ago, I wish them well. I'm sure that Conservatives would be happy to have that debate. I don't think Canadians are panicking because they are looking at what Pierre Poilievre has to say today. He is not the Prime Minister. Canadians are panicking because they see the government does not have a plan. That is why Canadians are getting upset.
They have an expectation. I think things have fundamentally changed since Donald Trump put out that tweet on Truth Social or wherever it was. It has fundamentally galvanized the country in terms of a single objective. And I think that there's an expectation that every single politician, that every single Canadian business leader actually work together to try and ward that off. And for somebody to stand up there and to kind of pout about this, 10-point plan, 7-point plan, whatever, that rectifies his own mistakes of the past, fair ball. He's going to stand up, he's going to have some ideas. Great. But that doesn't absolve him from the fact that he should be working with the Prime Minister, with the other party leaders, and with everybody in Parliament to try and actually avoid this situation.
I don't see any situation where he has declined that opportunity. In fact, he said that he would pause privilege debate in order to allow a conversation to happen on the border, in order to allow a conversation to happen about investments for the border. I don't know how that's unparliamentary. I don't know how it's unparliamentary to be tabling ideas and solutions for the government to consider. If he was sitting back and not proposing solutions, I might agree, but he's not.
Just sitting there repeating what Mr. Trump is suggesting all the time. If he's going to actually make that argument for Mr. Trump, Mr. Trump doesn't have to do that. He's got like a puppet up here that's clearly just spouting it all out anyway.
Well, this was the. I got to go to Françoise and give her the last word before we take a break. But this was the argument as outlined by all the people who were in the meeting today, and it was repeated at the Premier's meeting with the Prime Minister on Wednesday because David Eby came out saying, "Well, we got all kinds of fentanyl coming into the Port of Vancouver. It's a problem." And guys, for the next 6 weeks, let's get to January 20th and park this, because it fuels Trump. So, Françoise, I wonder about this. Mr. Poilievre may have a plan, and Canadians may think he's the best guy to deal with Donald Trump. He's not going to be the prime minister between now and January 20th unless something dramatic happens, which I don't think is going to happen. So I appreciate the political instincts and the political objectives and the raw politics at play right now. But should there be a downing of tools on the border issue until the 20th of January and see where things are on January 21st?
I do not think so. Not that fast. First of all, it's a humongous problem. Even though we can do some type of arguing about the percentage of us going to the States versus the reverse, fentanyl situation, the gun situation, like Emily so rightfully talked about. But now's not the time. I mean, we had that great 3-hour meeting with Donald Trump. And like I often say to people who don't know Donald Trump that much, anybody who succeeds at sitting down Donald Trump for 3 hours, whatever, if the song list is fantastic and it's his, it's really a victory in itself, because this guy, after 5 minutes, lose all interest. He likes those little quick comments and hope that it makes people go crazy, which sometimes seems to be happening here. It's not because he coughs that we all have to catch the cold right now. Right. So I think we have to be more adult and make sure that we take the right decision exactly for Canada, and try to sell it to Donald Trump as if it's beneficial for both sides. But we have to stop being so improvising. That doesn't make for a serious thing. Even his flag planting, I can just picture everybody going after that image, and that's diversion, guys. That's Donald Trump. Second tool, other than divide and conquer, diversion is another one. And while we're all doing that, we're not working at the right issues. But I do say, depending on how the leaders of each party acts from now on, according to the limits, because you're an official opposition leader, you are not the prime minister. At the same time, we are looking at them much more closely, and Emily was bang on that. It might change. Don't take for granted the past polls. Polls can change very quickly.
Well, look, the polls are one thing, the tariffs are another, and there's a time window to deal with that, and the polls, we'll deal with that when the election comes.